Great. So, Wakesho, thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us. First things first, World Whistleblowers Day. What do people celebrate on this day?
The World Whistleblowers Day is marked every year on the 23rd of June. So for this year, that is why we held this conference to celebrate it. So the main reason behind the commemoration of the 23rd of June, that is the Whistleblowers Day, is to celebrate, to honor, and to recognize whistleblowers world over and in our country alike, because you know that whistleblowers are a very important key in the fight against corruption. So a lot of these corruption scandals have come to light by courtesy of whistleblowers. So that's the first main reason, that's celebrating them and honoring them and recognizing them and the good work they do in the fight against corruption. Secondly is to also create awareness and to raise awareness among our people to understand what whistleblowing is, because many times if you're to stop someone on the street and ask them who a whistleblower is, more often than not they do not have an idea. So we take the time and days like today to amplify and to create awareness on whistleblowing, whistleblower protection, and who whistleblowers are and what they do for us.
Great. And of course, one would want to know this particular forum that you are having today as Transparency International Kenya, what it's centered about, some of the things that you guys talked about, and some of the resolutions that you had moving forward.
So maybe to begin with, as a general scope, again, as I mentioned, not many people are aware of who whistleblowers are and what they do. So a whistleblower is someone who gives information about corruption and any other wrong or misconduct in society. So if you're working in, say, a government office or a government department or even a company, and you see some things, you see that corruption is taking place and you notify others, you speak it out, that's who a whistleblower is. And historically in our country, we've had quite a number of whistleblowers that we are aware of. I don't know whether, you know, our listeners remember people like John Githongo, David Munyake, and recently, or as soon as 2 or 3 years ago, we have Sankale from what is commonly referred to as the Masai Mara University Mara heist. So those are some of the examples of whistleblowers we have seen as a country. And the thing again here is, those are just 3 I have mentioned, and because of the magnitude, and that's why we know them. So we would, of course, would want more and more people to speak out about corruption, but the challenge is that not many people are comfortable coming out, and it's because of the very many challenges and the dangers that whistleblowers go through. In fact, one of our researchers, Transparency International Kenya, conducts quite a number of surveys and researches, and one that we did, the bribery index, and a couple of these reports, we have found that around close to 87% of Kenyans who encounter corruption do not report it. And the reason they do not do so is that because they are scared of reprisal of whatever form. They're scared that if they come out and speak out against this corruption or misconduct, they're either going to lose their job, their contracts will be terminated, they're going to lose their lives, because again, as I've said, we see that even some whistleblowers have gone on to lose their lives. So there are quite a number of challenges that persons who speak out against corruption undergo, and that is why we do not see a culture of whistleblowing in our country.
You mentioned whistleblower protection. How sure am I as an individual or a would-be whistleblower that if I maybe give you guys a tip about a particular thing, I'm protected? I'm protected, one, by the institution that I report to, and secondly, even by the government, because at the end of the day, we all know people who've actually been gotten rid of by people who thought that these whistleblowers were actually a threat to them. So what goes through to ensure that the whistleblowers are actually protected?
Thank you for that question. And actually, to begin with, it is actually quite costly to be a whistleblower in this country. We have seen what has happened to whistleblowers in the past, as you have said. We have systems in place and mechanisms in place that offer some form of protection to whistleblowers. For example, we have the Witness Protection Agency that is charged under the Witness Protection Act to protect witnesses. But the challenge here is a whistleblower is not necessarily a witness, because you become a witness once you get into the judicial process, the court system. Yeah, so you might be a whistleblower but might not end up being a witness. So that protection is there, but it's only if you become a witness. So that's a big gap. Secondly, our constitution, of course, Article 10 of the Constitution provides for the national values, and some of those include integrity and transparency. We also have Chapter 6 of the Constitution on leadership and integrity. So these are sort of broad protections that exist in the Constitution. We have also, as a country, ratified the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, and state parties are required to put in place legislation, and it also broadly touches on whistleblower protection. Maybe another thing that I can also mention, we have the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act. So this is the act that deals with all of these corruption offenses. However, it does not provide protection for whistleblowers. So what I'm trying to say is that we do have laws in place, but they do not necessarily sufficiently protect whistleblowers. In fact, it's actually interesting to note that we have the Public Officers Ethics Act, and actually this particular act in section 41, it actually penalizes public officers if they divulge information that is acquired as they go about their business. So can you imagine if you're a public officer and you come across this information, that probably your seniors are misappropriating funds, then you'd be very scared to divulge that information or report that you're witnessing corruption happening, because you'll be a fine or a prison sentence will be imposed on you if you're convicted, and we are talking 5 million shillings or 5 years in prison or both. So I mean, that is actually quite it has a very negative bearing on potential whistleblowers. And so that's why one of our main clarion calls for today is that our country needs to enact a whistleblower protection legislation that will provide sufficient protection for whistleblowers, because as it is, to be honest, we do not have good protection for whistleblowers.
Great. And of course, the whistleblower thing is open to anybody. But one wonders. So I've seen something going wrong, or I've seen some cash being embezzled. I've reported. Then what next? Like, what are some of the processes that are now taking place after one has reported a particular case through your organization and other? I believe it's multi-sectoral and other multi-agencies that you work together to ensure that whatever tip that somebody has given is actually acted upon.
So in fact, even what you've just described is actually some of the reform that we are hoping to get through in the next couple of years, because as it is, a lot of our institutions do not have internal procedures and policies for the steps through which a whistleblower can go through. When you spot that misconduct, as you're saying, who do you report to? Do you go to your HR? Is there a designated officer who receives complaints? So internally, a lot of our organizations, as well as government institutions, are lacking in those internal mechanisms and procedures. That is one. What has been most common is that when people see these things, the best thing, they probably go to the media. So the media has been one of those institutions that has been an avenue through which whistleblowers report corruption. Institutions like the ESCC and the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission and the Commission on Administrative Justice are also some government bodies that people can approach and report. And civil society organizations such as ourselves are also increasingly putting in place mechanisms. So like, for example, TI Kenya has legal advice centers, so you would probably walk in and report, and we would then refer you to the appropriate agency who would be able to take up and follow action. But then again, as I've said, this is now the area of reform that we are calling for organizations and government bodies to put in place step by step, known procedures. And then the other thing again is for these procedures to be known, because if you do not know them, people will not take them up or make use of them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And some of the challenges that whistleblowers have been going through. I know you interact with a lot of them from time to time, and they tell you of some of the challenges. What are some of the challenges that they've been going through, and what is being done to actually meet this particular challenge, or at least closing the gaps?
Okay. So the most common one is termination of employment, as again, unfortunately, what we witnessed last week on Friday on the 17th of June, where Sankale, who is a whistleblower in the Masai Mara University heist case, he received a letter of dismissal from employment. So a lot of these whistleblowers go through that dismissal of from their employment or termination of employment. We also see a number of them, and it's not just employment, even contract termination. So even if you are a contractor, for example, then your contract is terminated. We have seen whistleblowers who have lost their lives, a lot of threats to violence, and a lot of things, these threats can also really weigh down on an individual. So there have been actual violence and threat to violence also.
Okay, great. And now, what are you doing to ensure that you're meeting those particular threats that, of course, the people are facing? You mentioned the Witness Protection Act, but as TI, is there anything that probably you guys are able to do, or maybe refer somebody to a place where they can actually get protection? And even in instances where maybe your contract is being terminated, like, do you guys maybe represent people in court to just ensure that they get whatever is justifiably theirs?
Indeed. So thank you for that question. So number one, like what we are doing today, we are creating awareness. We are letting Kenyans know that it's okay to whistleblow. There are people who have done it. We are recognizing them, and through that we hope that more and more people can have the courage to step out. So that's the first thing, letting people know that one of the key ways to bring corruption to an end is to encourage the practice of whistleblowing. Second, for those who have already faced this reprisal, we have legal advice centers where we sit them, we let them know, inform them of their rights and what they can do. We also advise them, as I've said, to who they could report to, agencies that they could follow up. Again, what is encouraged is a multi-sectoral approach, where there are things that is not our strength to do, but we team up with other organizations to help these whistleblowers achieve, or rather get justice at the end of the day.
Great. So for Sankale, are you guys maybe helping him with legal advice or something of the sort to just ensure that at least it pays off at the end of the day?
Indeed. And we are actually, with our partners, Amnesty International, ISPAC, and a couple of other organizations, we are actually coming together. This is work in progress. It's very new. Yesterday we did a press conference, and so day by day we're trying to, justice. It's justice for Sankale. That is the whole theme and what we are working towards. We are trying to make sure that whatever legal help he needs, he will get. Whatever other social support that he needs, he will get.
Great. And lastly, a whistleblower is just anybody and everybody can be one, but it comes at a great cost. What would you assure somebody out there who's maybe seen something, or is like, oh, I want to be like person X and Y? What would you assure them, or what advice would you give them?
I tell them to stand up and report it. Stand up, because that is how to change our country. If you do not speak out, then at the end of the day, we will never change. But as a society, we need to embrace, come out and just disclose whatever information you have. And organizations, you'll be surprised actually that the number of people who will be behind you to ensure that you're okay.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What does Mzalendo Trust have to do with World Whistleblowers Day?
So you've asked what Mzalendo has to do with World Whistleblowers Day. So as per our newest strategic plan, we have incorporated, in addition to our focus on Parliament, work around accountability and transparency. And to that effect, in fact, we are part and parcel of a platform called Open Government Partnership, which among other things seeks to promote and entrench accountability, openness, and inclusion in all governance affairs. So naturally, whistleblower protection, being a subset of the broader fight for accountability and transparency, becomes an area of natural interest. So it is within our context as actors in the accountability space that we seek to engage in the Whistleblower Protection Day.
Great. And being part of the actors in the accountability sector, there's been a lot of cases of corruption and mismanagement of funds, either at county government level, at national level, and even at private sector at times. But we don't get to hear a lot when it comes to private sector. But let's just stick to the public sector, especially the county government. What are some of the things that Mzalendo Trust has been doing to also encourage now people to come out and point to some of these ills or malfunctions that are happening in our public offices?
So as I noted, our primary focus is on Parliament. And as you may know already, Parliament is one of the three branches of government, the other being the executive and the other being the judiciary. So Parliament primarily plays three roles: oversight, representation, and legislation. Now, how we feed into this conversation, or how we seek to ensure that the public is engaged, is through public awareness and mainstreaming the participation of public in legislative processes, including in legislations that touch on matters corruption. Yes, so we facilitate the engagement. For example, now we have the Whistleblower Protection Bill, which is part and parcel of the broader effort towards securing accountability. We already have it on our Dokeza platform. Members of the public are engaging with it. In addition to that, we also have the False Claims Bill, again, which is currently at the Office of the Attorney General, but because we have gotten hold of it at this early level, we have uploaded it on our platform, so members of the public are able to engage with it.
Exactly.
Secondly, we work in partnership with other organizations, including Transparency International, Amnesty International, APNAC, and through such platforms, we seek to feed into that broader campaign on public and community sensitization.
Great. And of course, on that particular bit, because again, whistleblowing goes, there's a very thin line between whistleblowing and actually false accusations. So how do you ensure that whatever information that you've gotten is actually the right information, and it's actually information that meets the particular threshold to either help with prosecuting a particular case, or meets the correct threshold to actually present it as a case to the court system?
So I think there's a distinction that I need to make. So we work toward securing whistleblowers. So at this point in time, we do not primarily play in the space of receiving, analyzing, or processing information from whistleblowers. That we leave to probably the organizations that are focused on that, but also to the public agencies, including the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, that are legally empowered to do that. So the best that we do to ensure that the engagement is done professionally and within the confines of the law is to sensitize members of the public, one, on what such information should entail, two, where they can report such information, and probably advise on the strategies that can be undertaken, keeping in mind that whistleblowing is a very risky affair in the country. So we do not handle, at this point in time at least, we do not handle information that is provided by whistleblowers.
Okay, so I'm a whistleblower. What are the strategies that I should employ to ensure that the information is out there?
So there are a raft of strategies that can be employed. As I noted, the whole question of whistleblowing isn't a walk in the park. It has attendant risks. We've seen whistleblowers who have been subjected to a myriad of frustrations, and in fact some of them have had to pay dearly with their lives. So given that context, then it naturally requires that whoever aspires or seeks to do whistleblowing has to be very creative in a way that would allow for the information to reach the targeted actors, including duty bearers, but not necessarily at the expense of their risk. So there are a raft of strategies. You can use anonymous strategy, you could use anonymous approach, something that is very well allowed by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, as well as the Commission on Administrative Justice, the Ombudsman. That's number one. Number two, you could approach these agencies you could send the information in anonymously. You could approach these agencies quietly, discreetly, and covertly. You share with them that information, then they take it from there without necessarily subjecting you to some sort of public knowledge. Thirdly, and this is something that was used to say by the late David Munyakei, who blew up the lead on the Goldenberg scandal, you could use some of these influential personalities, influential politicians. There are politicians. We are in a democratic context, challenges notwithstanding. There are some politicians who are keen to ensure that government is oversighted. So once you give them this information, they can own the process, and of course they would cover up for whatever risks that may otherwise face you should you do it directly.
And of course we've seen some of the whistleblowers undergo a myriad of challenges, including the ultimate price of losing their lives, and it's something that is very costly. So what assurance will I have as a whistleblower that whatever journey I'm taking, or if I decide to now become a whistleblower, it's for public good, but also for my personal good, so that now I don't lose my life at the end of the day?
Thank you for that question. I think it's a very, very important question, given that the experience that we have has shown that whistleblowing is among the riskiest undertakings in our country. So let me put it this way. To safeguard your life, as I noted, one would be to advise on the best strategies that you could undertake to ensure that there's minimal harm to your life, but without compromising the undertaking of blowing the whistle on whatever corruption cases that are being undertaken. That's number one. Number two, I think that there are some whistleblowers who are daring enough and perhaps being seized of this element of patriotism, that they really don't care what happens to them so long as they reveal the information and it impacts positively the fight against corruption. And I think examples that could be cited includes that of David Munyakei. He came out in the public, and of course he used politicians then in the opposition to amplify his voice, because he was just a small man, a clerk at the Central Bank of Kenya. We also have the case of John Githongo. Of course, he was a high-profile figure. He went public, but again, fearing for his life, he had to fled. You now have Spencer, the personnel at Masai Mara University, who was laid off just last week. So I think there's a level of patriotism, again, that perhaps seizes some of us, so they just don't care. They proceed, hoping that probably the goodwill of the public would come to their rescue. But again, as I noted, the best we could do is to advise on the best strategies based on the obtaining contextual dynamics.
And okay, of course you mentioned some of those strategies, including now using anonymity and things like that.
Yes.
I want to be a whistleblower, and at the end of the day, it also has its own repercussions. What would you
advise somebody out there watching this and they're like, Alex, advise me, I want to be this, but I am fearing that I may lose my only source of life, which is actually sometimes employment or a contract or maybe something like that. What would you tell them?
That's a very good question, and thank you for asking it. My advice would be, responsibility to the country is some sort of a call to duty. So once we embrace it that way, then we just have this sort of understanding that we would not just sit back and see things happening in a way that harms the interest of the public, because at the end of the day, we are all stakeholders in this enterprise that is the Republic of Kenya. But we do acknowledge that each one of us, we do have our livelihoods, which might be threatened if we do this sort of whistleblowing. It is at this point that what I describe as strategy comes in handy. It is just to analyze the situation, whatever it is that you want to blow the whistle on, just see how well whatever strategies may work to ensure that you blow the whistle without risking your life. And in an increasingly, or rather in an environment that technology is slowly gaining momentum, I think technology is one of the options that we could use. We've seen it work. You could probably create, we call them some sort of this fake account, say in Twitter, that perhaps may not identify, may be identified readily. If you have something to blow the whistle about, you can simply say record it, upload it on the Twitter. It will trend, assume a life of its own in a way that would attract the attention of various duty bearers. I think that could be a strategy. The second strategy is identify organizations that are heavily invested in public interest, including public litigation. You do have Transparency International, heavily invested in the war against corruption, ourselves, Mzalendo Trust, Amnesty International, that could really absorb this shock without necessarily feeling the impact that you would feel as an individual. So identifying the right organizations, establishing contacts with them, and ensuring that you channel whatever information anonymously without making yourself known public. That could be another strategy. Thirdly, is to work with agencies, duty bearers. At the end of the day, we are paying them, we as taxpayers, and by we I mean taxpayers. Kenyans pay them to do exactly this. So you could establish links with them. I know there's a certain degree of disillusionment amongst Kenyans because we've had so many cases of corruption. I note that corruption in Kenya is as old as the Republic of Kenya itself, no doubt about it. So there might be an element of disillusionment amongst we Kenyans because we see a lot of corruption, but hardly do we see any punishment or impact from these investigative agencies. We don't see people being convicted, at least those we call the big fish. We have corruption cases that are yet to be finalized over 20 years down the line. Look at the case of Goldenberg. So you do have these duty bearers, much as they have not demonstrated some sort of positive outcome insofar as their undertakings is concerned. I think they still provide an opportunity that we can work with. Just use whatever small window and hope that whatever information that is provided may yield some sort of positive impact. So those are the three main strategies that I could think of, that whoever feels that they have something to reveal but fear for their lives or their livelihoods might use to ensure that the information gets out there, but not at their own risk.
Great. And sometimes, especially with this young generation, of course, the 90s, the millennials and everyone, there's just this feeling of, I want some personal brilliance. I want to be identified as the person who blew the whistle on this. What would you tell them?
Thank you very much. And I think there's a great something to admire about those of them that are in the digital age, as you describe, the boldness, the eagerness to claim their rightful space in the country. As I noted, Kenya is an enterprise with all of us as equal stakeholders, right? So I think it is encouraging to see those of them that are keen to boldly and courageously secure their space within this big enterprise that is the Republic of Kenya. Now, what I would advise them is that, yes, there is that excitement to do that, but we have to be strategic. Strategy is as old as the creation itself. So you have to be strategic in anything that you do, because at the end of the day, what you want to do is not just to showcase, but you want to do it in a way that it will secure the desired impact. So if working stealthily and covertly would secure more impact, go with it. If coming out openly and boldly would secure more impact, again, go with it. So it is a question of just understanding the context. I would say that whatever approach is taken, we may not have a one-fit-all approach. It has to be based on the analysis, examination of the context. Yes.
And I think that's a good place to end it at. Thank you very much, Alex, for talking to us, and we appreciate the work that Mzalendo Trust is doing.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to have been of help, and we look forward to engaging more. Thank you very much, and asanteni sana, you people from the media. You are doing it. And by the way, you too have a role to play in sensitization. I believe, sorry, I forgot to mention this, and I sincerely apologize. Media as a sector has an immense role to play in fight against corruption. The influence that you control is so immense that if it can be creatively channeled, then it could shift the narrative toward that which we desire as a country. So thank you very much for the good job.
Asante.